started, we wanted to thank a number of people who helped to make this research project as happy and possible. First, I want to thank my collaborators who are here today, and also Dr. Estuba, who did our deeper analysis, so he's not able to be here today. The USF administration and everyone who helped us funding with this project. We'd also like to thank the Department of Environmental Protection and the Division of Historical Resources for giving us permission to use the project and access to the land, as well as the Department of Juvenile Justice, who is giving us access to the South property and we're continuing to work with them there. We also want to thank the Department of Corrections and the Jackson County Department of Corrections, as they provided a lot of resources and time to help to clear the land, which made it possible for us to do this work. Most of all, we have to thank our graduate students who put in all of the hard work over the past year, and without them, we couldn't have put together this big project. John Powell, Meredith Tice, Brad Lanning, Ashley Humphrey, Rich Wells, Gary Dowdy, Melissa Poe, Christina Calva, Ashley Maxwell, and Beth Van Bishop, and all of that. They really dedicated themselves in this year. We also want to thank the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office and Sheriff Chief for the support and sending volunteers. Specifically Danny Gill, Jason Brando, Brandon Douglas, and Jake Becker, who volunteered for field work and learned CPR along the way. In all of the projects and research that we do, we combine graduate student research along with training for medical legal community, and often this is around cold cases and working with detectives, and so this in-service approach is what we take to all our work and brought that collaboration to this project. There are also a number of experts who provided an opinion about different aspects of this in their reports or letters to us or as appendices in the report. And that includes Associate Medical Examiners for District 13, Dr. Laura Hare, Dr. Les Kosowski, fire investigators from Tampa, Christopher Stone and Al Alcala, and USF integrative biology professor Dr. Gordon Fox, and his student in New York. We also like to thank, last but not least, of the families that we've worked with and come to know today, Glenn and Richard Blondell, who are here today, and Obel Crow, who couldn't be here because she's traveling. But we feel very privileged to have come to know this through this project, and hope that it brings down the resolution answers that they seek. So beginning in 2011, we initiated a project to document and study the historic cemetery located at the former Boys and Home School in Mariana, referred to as Waco. The school was in operation from 1900 to 1911, but the scope of our work and the cemetery itself was in use from 1900 to 1960, and so our research is specific to that time frame. Florida public statute regarding public lands and property relating to historic resources allows the division to issue permits for excavation and surface reconnaissance on state lands to qualified institutions. We applied for a 1-832 permit for archaeological research and obtained permission from the Department of Environmental Protection, which is the owner of this land, to do this work. And specifically, we had 5 goals: to register, document, and map the cemetery, to identify graves through remote sensing and archaeological methods such as GPR and soil chemistry. GPR is dominant in the area. Research the site's history, creation, and use based on archival research and ethnographic interviews. Research the primary and secondary sources to determine who is buried in the cemetery and the morbidity and mortality patterns about the children that are buried there, and establish if there are one or more burial graves. We planned initially for 2 weeks of field work and spent over 8 weeks in the field, as well as additional trips to Mariana and the state archives. So, what did we do? Demographic patterns shift through time, typically by design. Not all burial locations are accounted for. The cause of death is not known for the majority of cases. There's a high degree of variation in reporting, and archaeological field work that shows a minimum of 50 graves at the depot location. We found a record of 98 deaths in the historic documents, including boys ages 6 to 18, and 2 adult staff members. Children were originally committed to the school for criminal offenses such as theft and murder, but the law was later amended to identify minor offenses such as incorrigibility, truancy, and dependency, which propelled the school to become the largest reform school at its time. The lengths of sentences were changed from a maximum of 4 years to 21 years, and the conditions became too overcrowded, mass numbers of boys would be sent home, sometimes 80 to 100 boys at a time. These shifts seem to relate to financial and labor needs throughout that period of time. Not all of the burials are accounted for. We found that records indicate 45 individuals were buried on the school grounds, 31 were shipped home to families or buried in other locations, and 22 remain unknown. Throughout, the historical records are incomplete and often provide conflicting information. When the cause and manner of death is reported, although it's not in most cases, but when it is, the leading causes of death are infectious disease, fires, physical trauma, and drowning. Discrepancies between the deaths reported in the school's biennial reports, the ledgers, the coroner reports, death certificates occurred throughout that 60-year period of time. And just as an example, in a report from Superintendent Van Landenham to the Board of Commissioners in 1926, they recorded a total of 4 deaths. However, the school ledgers show that there were 6 boys that died during that time. And the 2 that were not reported were, one was Thomas Curry, who actually died after running away from gun trauma. So this type of discrepancy you see, like I said, throughout that entire time. Curry is interesting as well because it highlights some of the other mortality patterns that we found. For example, 8% of boys died following attempted escapes. 23% of boys died within the first 3 months of being remanded to the school. And there's inconsistency among those who were issued death certificates, even after 1920 when it was required by the state that a physician certify the death. There are numerous other examples of variation in coding, such as the photograph I'll refer you here to the second image. It comes from the Florida State Archives, and it's labeled as circa 1950s as a possible memorial. The only record that we could find of a funeral at the school in the 1950s was 1952, and that of Billy Jackson. We talked to 2 people who knew him and were there at the school at the time, and neither of them recognized this photo. So we don't know if this represents an additional funeral that occurred there. They both said that there were more than one that year, or how else, or if the date is wrong, or just how it's written. Other examples we found where names have not appeared in the various reports include 2 additional boys that died in a fire in 1914. It was Halfin and Escornet. An additional 11 unidentified African-American boys that died in the flu outbreak in 1918. William McKinley, an African-American boy that died of an unknown cause in 1915. And Robert Hewitt, a 16-year-old boy who died of gunshot wounds to the chest after running away. His death certificate states gunshot wounds in the chest by person or persons unknown, but we were not able to find any additional documentation that would help explain who he was or what happened to him. Archaeological field work shows an estimated minimum of 50 grave shafts in this area, in the surrounding wooded area. Earlier, it was reported that there were 49, and at that time we thought we found the southern boundary, and we went back and did some additional field work, dug a trench and tried to ground truth one of the southern anomalies that we've been uncertain about, which actually located down here. And it was in fact the burial shaft, and that's why you may see this difference between 49 and 15. We wanted to make sure that that was clarified and explained. So we found nearly twice as many burials as were thought to exist. Many of them have been under the brush and trees. Recognizing the historical significance of civil rights issues in Florida and in the area of juvenile justice, and the rights of families to have accountability and transparency as important aspects of restorative justice, we made the following recommendations. Additional field work in the areas surrounding Boot Hill, including test excavations in areas that were marked by GPR anomalies. We suspect there could be more burials there. We recommend horizontal clearing through mechanical excavation to the primary burial area in order to identify specific individual graves and get a very accurate account. Exhumation and skeletal autopsy for forensic, pathological, and anthropological analysis to determine the health, activities, cause of death, and identification. For reinterment and repatriation to the families, and additional research and interviews, including all of the various stakeholders that are involved. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Wells.
Good morning. My name is Christian Wells. I'm an archaeologist in the Department of Anthropology at the University of South Florida. And I currently oversee the archaeological research at the Boot Hill Cemetery. I'll keep my comments very brief because Dr. Kimmerly basically said it all. I'll take you on a quick tour, though, of the archaeological research that we did, mostly referencing this particular image. Based on the archival research that Dr. Jackson is going to speak about in a few minutes, we designed an archaeological survey of the Boot Hill Cemetery area. We decided to use, Dr. Kimberly mentioned, ground-penetrating radar, also called GPR, which is a geophysical prospection instrument that you can use, that we use routinely in archaeology to look for disturbances in the ground. It works by means of an antenna that sends a pulse of energy, a high-frequency radar, into the ground. And if there are any disturbances in the ground, anything that's buried, any changes in the matrix of the soil, that energy will reflect off of the boundary of that disturbance and come back to the antenna. Depending on how quickly the energy returns to the antenna, how quickly the signal returns to the antenna, we can get an idea of the depth of that disturbance. And generally, depending on the intensity of the signal, we can get an idea of how big the disturbance is. And so what we prepared for you here is a summary of that geophysical survey. This particular image shows what the ground surface looks like at about 4 feet below contemporary ground surface. And what we refer to as anomalies or subsurface anomalies are represented in this image by the bright red spots. The blue areas are areas where the radar just kept on going and did not find any anomaly to reflect back to the instrument. Because we took readings on a consistent grid, we were able to create this kind of an image map so that you can see what the surface looks like overall in the Boot Hill Cemetery area. The current Boot Hill Cemetery is marked by 31 metal crosses. And so based on this and the archival research, we anticipated finding between 25 and maybe 30 burials. In fact, what we found was, as Dr. Kimberly noted, closer to 50 burials. And the black and red rectangles mark the areas where we believe there are burial shafts. And in some of those instances, we have gone back and excavated shallow trenches so that you can see the area where a burial shaft was excavated into the ground. And we have a photograph of one of those. You can see the white cross on top. You can see, if you look in the soil profile, you can see an A horizon and a very sharp boundary to a clay-rich B horizon. And then you can see, let's point it out very quickly, a very sharp boundary where the grave shaft was excavated. And then you can see mottled and mixed soils from the excavation, and we put the soil back in. So through these very shallow trenches, we can then test out our ideas and see if these patterns of anomalies are in fact burial trenches. We have confirmed, as Dr. Kimberly said, about 50 of these presently. There are areas that we have not yet conducted this kind of ground truthing or testing. And so you can see some anomalies that are not marked at all with any kind of probable or possible burial shaft. And that still remains to be done. So in essence, there could be a much greater number of burials at the site, but at this point we just don't know. Just to explain this image a little bit more, on the left, you can see some significant disturbances below the ground, and these are probably associated with a historical road that passed by the cemetery, and the creation or excavation of that road disturbed soils in that area. And we can see, in fact, today at the cemetery, you can see fence posts and barbed wire marking that general area of the road. To the north of the cemetery, you can see a lot of blue in this image, and so we're pretty confident that we found the northern boundary of the cemetery. We're pretty confident we've reached the southern boundary of the cemetery. It's just the eastern area that is today very heavily wooded, lots of vegetation, that's making it difficult for us to ground truth or test out what some of those other anomalies are. But as Dr. Kimberly mentioned, that's a point of future work that we'll be doing. To evaluate whether or not what we saw in the soil profile was actually a trench, we did take soil samples from those profiles of the trenches that we excavated and brought them back to the laboratories at USF and analyzed those soils physically and chemically and determined that there were in fact, from the burial, what we thought were burial shafts, were in fact mixed deposits of the A and B horizon. So the very organic rich humus and then those subsurface clays. So the areas of burial shafts do in fact contain those kind of mixed or mottled soils. And I brought some of those series and put them on the table here if you want to look at them later. They're very, I think they're very clear. We also brought a number of artifacts that we encountered through the excavations. And the artifacts are mainly associated with historical activities at the site, but they're of significance because of the nature of the design styles on the ceramics, the nature of the bottle glass, the look and shape of the nails that we found. We're able to date the cemetery and date portions of the cemetery from that. And so we have an idea of the earliest dates just based on the artifacts go back to about the 1920s, and then we have materials all the way to the present. So it really helps us understand the dating of the chronology.
Good morning. I enter the conversation at the sentence in the executive summary that reads, historic cemeteries are among the most valuable cultural resources for documenting community heritage and providing important means to understand past events. The work being done at the Boot Hill Cemetery on the site of the Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida, reminds us very clearly about the relationship between the past and the present. As a cultural anthropologist, I am interested in how living communities and people connect with the history and heritage of the site. And I think that's one of the most significant aspects of this study. And in many ways, my work is just beginning because the recovery of the archival data, the forensic analysis, the data, the archaeological work, identifying wave shafts and analyzing soil samples give us one basis of understanding what took place at the school. One of the key goals of the project involved connecting the past and the present through understanding the history and heritage of the people, again, and the communities and the institutions directly associated with the school were impacted by our inquiry and findings. So these kinds of studies are not done in isolation. Obviously, with the families here and the community that the school sits in, our work impacts people and how they experience the past and how they're experiencing our findings. So much of the work that I'm doing involves the messy part of actually talking to people and engaging with people. Much of my work has been accomplished with the help of many of the grad students that Dr. Kimberly mentioned in her introduction. We did a lot of archival work, ethnohistorical and ethnographic field work, including spending time in the community of Marianna, having casual conversations with people, going into the courthouse, looking through countless numbers of records. Many of the students spent time at the Florida State Archives, looking at historical maps, looking at old school newspapers, school ledgers, and all these kinds of documents providing additional information on things that went on at the school. We're interested not only in, again, the material record, but the everyday lives of the people, the daily activities of what went on at the school, and not only for the people who, the boys that attended the school, but also the people who worked at the school. So it's a lot of work left to be done in terms of interviewing people and understanding their connections. Going forward, we're interested in, for example, one of the last interviews I participated in was showing one of the interviewees this photograph here at the cemetery. And the look on the person's face when they were shown that photograph was pretty priceless, in the sense that you can see that it brought back some intense memories and connections to what he experienced, because he was a person who had attended that school. And you can see his reflection of exactly his experience. So what we hope to do is, the more we interview people, the more we talk to people, perhaps find out maybe where other grave sites are located or other important areas on the school grounds are located, by talking to people. And maybe even identify some of the people pictured in these photographs and these other documents that we have. So we want to put people in the conversation with a lot of this material record. So in conclusion, I would like to say thank you to the family members who are here, and I join with my colleagues in thanking them, with the people who provide intimate knowledge and often painful memories and associations with the school, for sharing their experiences and helping us learn about the school, about their experiences, and challenging us to ask more questions. And that's, like I said, that's where I am right now. Looking forward to interviewing many more people, digging through many more archives, and really trying to really investigate more sites. And the final statement is, as well, is that cemetery was that school was a good period of time was during the period of segregation in U.S. history. So segregation permeated every aspect of culture and lives of people who were attendees of that school know. And so one of the opening items or the open questions is there another cemetery? Because the cemetery that has been found was located really on what was called the black side, or the north side of campus. So it's highly unlikely, or based on a lot of my other historical work during this period, that that was the only cemetery, because segregation permeated every aspect of the life.
Somebody agrees with us.
Thank you.
If I can ask Dr. Willis to join me up here and stand here. Dr. Jackson, if you guys have any questions, once again, there are family members here who are able to be interviewed once you're done with this. There are some students, some former students of the Dover School that are also here as well, that you interview once we're done with the questions from professors.
It needs to be by the microphone.
Can we get some of the microphone?
Oh, yes, you're on microphone.
Do you have any understanding of the underreporting? Do you have a sense of why the deaths were underreported when in the biennial reports?
Well, it's a good question, and I can say we spent a lot of time and effort to cross-validate all these different sources. It doesn't seem to be unique to one particular time period or administration, as we were looking at maybe just the shift in policy. There was a lot of turnover, particularly in pre-1930s. A number of superintendents, a number of administrators. I think between 1950 and 1919, there were 7 different superintendents. And so I can't say exactly why. I think that overall there's core records within. They just never produce a list. And in fact, actually, that's one of the things that was most interesting all the way to the present. When you look at the work that FDLE did in 2008, 2009, that was the first list and combination of look at this. And it wasn't that anyone in the state had to produce, information, so. Seems to be
Follow-up question to that, Doctor. I mean, so are you saying that it appears, because it's over such an extended period of time, that it's more sloppy bookkeeping, if you will, than maybe a cover-up or anything like that?
I don't want to say that it was a cover-up. I think there was sloppy bookkeeping. I think that there were efforts throughout its history where they did try to project a certain image. And that was really interesting. If you know, the two main industries that the school ran was printing and bookmaking in those early years. And this, at one point, did all of the printing for the state. And every time there was an incident, for you know, particularly those that resulted in deaths, like the fire in 1914 and the flu. And you think, how controversial can a flu outbreak be? Well, it was. The state did an investigation, which prompted the board of managers to do their own investigation. And when there were deaths, there was a coroner's investigation. And consistently, each report comes up with someone else is responsible, a different list of who's dead. And so that was what struck us. It's one thing 100 years later to say, well, there's incomplete information, but even at the time, there were these major discrepancies. And I think everybody wanted to put, you know, their own spin on it.
How did you do the excavations without actually disturbing the graves? Did you come across remains of caskets, or were they? How were they buried? Can you talk about that?
So we were intentionally shallow, but
That was it. The excavations were very shallow, maybe about a foot deep. But after you get below the modern A horizon, the organic kind of humus horizon, you can see very clearly in the soil profile if a trench or a burial shaft had been excavated in antiquity. And so it was enough for us just to confirm the anomalies that we detected with a very shallow excavation. But in the course of the work, we did not encounter any human or animal remains at all. A small number of artifacts, again, that helped us date the site, but no human remains at all. That might be for a later phase of this investigation, exhumation. But in this phase, we were simply delineating the boundaries of the cemetery and trying to find out how many individual grave shafts.
Dr. Kimberly, could you explain, you said you found 50 grave shafts. Does that mean you found 50 graves? Could there possibly be more bodies in one shaft than just...
The way I always like to describe Utah to students is that it's kind of like a Looper window with streamlining. It's not a one-to-one correlation, and that's why we use words like it's a minimum, it's an estimate. So without doing a full excavation, we can't say exactly what's there. We have a good picture and a good window into it, but it's limited as well. So could some of the anomalies actually be two burials next to one another, and what would just happen to one large anomaly? Yeah, it could. And likewise, it could be that there's no remains in the shaft. I mean, we can't say what's there without looking.
How does this project impact you all professionally and personally?
That's part of the report.
Well, as I said, I mean, what I think first motivated me and got my interest was the story of Miss Crow, because it was reminiscent of so much of the work we do with missing and unidentified persons and looking for clandestine graves. This is what we do all the time in other contexts. And so her lifelong search for her brother, which was being public through work of and others, was what, you know, just spoke to us. And so it's really been a privilege to get to know her and to learn with her over this past year. And for us, I think first and foremost is always the rights of families and that ability to have equal access to the justice system and accountability.
Is there any? Just wanted to add one thing. I second what Erin said, but would also add that a major part of what anthropologists do is to give a voice for people who